or if somebody wasn't able to make it, you will be able to watch it later on. Our replays will also be available on our YouTube channel. And if you have questions, please enter them using the Q&A function. We will try to answer them either as we go along or at the end. If you did register, you will receive an email after this is over when the recording is available. And again, please ask questions during the webinar by clicking on that Q&A button. All right. Next slide, Tom, please. All right. So, welcome to Guarding Your Inbox, Navigating Business Email Compromises, a great webinar that we have about business email compromises, what we're seeing, and how to protect yourself against them. And with that, I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, live from the Trusted Sec studios, here's Tom Millar and Liz Waddell from the Trusted Sec Incident Response Team.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Tyler. My name is Liz Waddell, and as Tyler said, with me is also Tom Millar. We are two of the consultants who are battling, facing, dealing with business email compromises on a daily basis. So what are we here to talk about? So one, if you don't know what a business email compromise is, you lucky person. You probably will find out about it soon if unfortunately that's because it's happening to everybody. So typically, what is a business email compromise? So the broader accepted idea is that somebody has social engineered their way into a mailbox and have done something bad, right? So the typical one that we see is this example, what we have on the screen. An attacker chooses a target company, they compromise an email account from that company, then go bury into that email, find other victims within their clients, usually of that customer, and then target them to try and get some money paid, right? So in the end, their goal with that is the attackers just want to get some money paid to them, which is, a pretty good thing that we see with a lot of attackers. All right, so next slide, please. But are we only talking about those attackers who want to get paid through wire transfers? And I think you probably have heard of this before, or maybe unfortunately have seen it firsthand. So the wire transfer situation is what happens when an attacker goes in, can pose as somebody from the same company or a different company, and they're coming in and basically they will put in fake bank numbers, wire transfer numbers, those things in order to try and get funds that don't belong to them transferred out. But it's not just wire transfers that we see. Obviously, phishing, most of these do come from phishing. There's something we call romance scams, which is not as scandalous as it sounds. And unfortunately, those tend to target a particular segment of the population. We also see workman's comp and spam. Spam is something that we see all the time. Typically, when this happens, an attacker is using somebody's mailbox to spam the people that were within that mailbox contacts list. So this can be very unfortunate for a company if one of your employees' mailboxes get compromised and then all of your customers are getting spam emails from you, either trying to get into that company so they can do some further compromise of a different target, or just to try and get money from them that way. So spam is definitely something we've seen. And I think some of you may have also seen the gift card scam. And this is a lot of times these will happen over text or over email. And I have personally received them from people saying, this is hi, it's me, it's your CEO, it's Dave Kennedy, I need you to get a gift card for me. And typically your CEO does not want you to get a gift card, right? So that should be a red flag. That's probably something that's up. So those are just some ideas of some of the things that we can see within a business email compromise. And next slide, please. Where we are typically seeing these is within the Microsoft 365 environment. And Microsoft, because this is the infrastructure that we're seeing that is most of these things are occurring in, has put together some pretty comprehensive guides. There are things that are available on GitHub. This is a good one to download. But also you can just go to the Microsoft site and they've got a lot of great educational materials down. So we're going to be focusing this conversation on M365, certainly business email compromises compromises can occur in different environments, say like Gmail, but we're not seeing that as often as we see the M365. So one of the reasons that we're seeing such an uptick in these is just because of the ease it is to execute them, right? There are a lot of phishing as a service kits that are available. They're relatively cheap. You don't even really have to go into a dark market to get them. You can acquire them fairly easy. So these are just attacks that are going to keep coming and keep coming. But I know the thing that you're all going to be saying, and go to the next slide, please. There's a drum roll here for anticipation, but we have MFA. Okay, so, and again, caveating here, please don't say we're not telling you to not have MFA, but this is, you know, for a long time, this was like the way to protect yourself from business email compromise. So Tom, can you talk us through some of the ways that we see attackers circumventing that?
Certainly. So just as Liz was talking about, the key thing as a takeaway, and it's usually one of our initial questions that we get into for any kind of scoping calls or incidents and what have you, is whether or not the victimized organization has MFA already on it. Sometimes we hear that they do, sometimes they don't. And in the cases that we find out that somehow that MFA was bypassed in someone, that usually turns into a goal to figure out how that was done. Some of the things that we've presented here in front of you is for you to see the options for the threat actors to be able to use. Something where they will take like a fraudulent proxy or reverse proxy that is set up between the phishing email that they send up, the specially crafted URL that passes through that fraudulent proxy, and that proxy based on a kit like Evil Proxy, Murarina, some of the other ones that are out there, as Liz was saying, they're freely and easily available, for anyone to use, and it doesn't require a computer science degree to be able to stand it up and run it. They intercept the web token, or excuse me, the web cookie or the session token, and then they will come back and use that against the organization. When they log in with the username and the password, it asks, if there's an existing session. And having that session allows you to go into your organization and spend time after time. Instead of spending all your time authenticating, that session token allows you to stay in the organization. But that's an Achilles heel to deal with. The other thing that we see with, bypassing of MFA is the so-called MFA fatigue. If you choose to have your 2FA device be a text message that's sent to you, and it's asking you to approve or deny. And eventually, when you see these things getting over and over again, you don't want to see the notifications anymore. You just succumb to it and just say, out of frustration, say approve all going forward. That's a prompt bombing, and that's another method that these threat actors attempt to get into the organization, is by you just getting sick and tired of it. And then the one that's that I like to bring up, and we see this time and time again. Actually, we heard about it over the summer, through vishing, in the news late this summer, where we had attackers calling help desks, impersonating users, setting up a false sense of heightened urgency, and forcing information out of them so they can bypass MFA, or they can just get on so somebody can keep their job and not get in trouble, because who they believe is on the other side of the conversation is actually some importance in the organization. So please, by all means, we do suggest that you do have MFA, but do be aware that attackers are trying to defeat that. They put kits in between that SSL connection to your intended source, whether it's going to be irs.gov or an EC2 instance on Amazon, or they attempt to prompt bomb you so you get tired of it, or they call you up with some false sense of urgency. And keep in mind, AI is doing a pretty good job in mimicking voices. So something to think about. I'm going to get into the session hijacking because I talked a little bit about it. It's super, super easy. It's a matter of just being able to intercept that web cookie or that session token, and then just paste it and continue to use it. Because once the attacker has that vulnerable user's username, their password, now a session token, Bob's your uncle. They're in, and they're going to go nuts with it. So let's talk about the now what. I have a slide here that covers some of this information where the attacker's perspective at the top tier, they've compromised the email from some trusted source. They got a username and password, and then they supply, a vulnerable user where they scoped out. They say, here, we need you to go to this Dropbox link, or there's a document here that is ready for your review, and it says HR or something else like that. We've seen a number of these in the past year that I've been working in a number of these cases, and they have that attacker in the middle, AITM, phishing page that's out there, and it's meant to intercept that session token. Once they grab that session token, it's a theft. Then they take that combination of username, the password, the session token, and then they return. Here we're at that second tier where they use that stolen session cookie or token, and they log into the email account. They are aware of the files that are available on a SharePoint, through Azure, or what have you, and then they start fortifying their position. One of the things that we'll see a lot of the times is the sudden presence of new mailbox rules that are added to the victimized account. And those rules we'll get into a little bit later are there for, secreting information out. There's specific things that, the attackers always want to do. They want to read and collect those emails. They're looking for the juicy stuff, the stuff that says invoice, payment, ACH, due, things like that, because these are going to be the things that they use as tip-offs of who to contact in the organization, who receives payment, and with those payments, then they can start moving the con a little bit forward. I like to say the con goes on. Furthermore, the other thing to talk about it while they have that unapproved access to that victimized user session is the creation of a new MFA device. They may turn it off. They may add one of their own and other things like that. So we'll see things like no longer the users getting MFA notifications. They're not getting push notifications. They're not being asked to log in, what have you, or inexplicably their login doesn't work anymore, but the attacker's able to get in. They're using this so anytime at their will and direction, when they're comfortable with it, they can log into the account, use their own MFA, and then the BEC campaign goes on. This means that they start reaching out to other users, identifying who's got money bags, who makes decisions, who's some level of importance, reach out to other users, trying to ply them or force this thing along, and reaching out to external recipients. That could be customers, that could be vendors, that could be suppliers. Once they figured out where the money comes from, then they can start talking to those people saying, hey, we need you to change payment information, and here is how. Here's our fictitious payment information that you should use going forward. And the con goes on into the second stage.
I think you're going to make a song to go with that. So if anybody can supply some magical music to go with that, it'd be awesome. All right. So we're going to break this down a little further. So we're going to break down business email compromises, basically according to the incident response process. We are incident responders. This is how we think. So we're going to start off with talking about the preparation phase. And these are things that you can do ahead of time to make sure that in case or when an incident happens, that you're prepared. So next slide. And one of the first things that you're going to need to understand as you are navigating your business email compromise is, what is my license level? What are the loggings that I have available from M365? And Microsoft, no shade to them, but they don't make this easy to understand. And things are constantly changing. So what we're talking about is the state as it is today. It will be changing over the next year because of things that have, y'all can go look at what happened. But so right now, if you have a standard business standard E3 licensing, which is what most organizations have, there are going to be some events that you're not going to be able to see. And the biggest one that we generally have is that you can't see what emails an attacker accessed. And we get asked that question all the time. And unfortunately, if you have an E3 license, you can't see that. It was logging at default 90 days. It just switched to 100 180 days. I'm not sure if you have to enable that now, but I know you can at least get 180 days worth of logging at this time. The E5 Advanced, you can get 365 days, and you can go up to 10 years. But again, that is going to be based on your institution's license levels with Microsoft. And it remains confusing. I always have to go through 27 different pages to try and figure out like what you have with what. But Tom, anything, like, I just go figure we're going to rant about this now. But Tom, anything you want to add to this rant?
I do. I have a couple of things to add to it. So as Liz was talking about, it's in the state of flux. As of October 17th, any events that are created after October 17th will have a 180-day lifespan, up from 90 days, which is a good thing. I'm in the world of trust but verify. So double check that. And again, that applies to that standard, that Microsoft Business Standard E3 licensing. It's more cost effective for folks to have, and a lot of organizations will have this. But do keep in mind, you won't be able to answer the question, what emails were read. So understand that. What comes at a premium, and not all organizations have it blanketed across their entire enterprise, is there's the E5, which is advanced auditing. We can get into sent emails. We can get, a lot of scrutiny through those. Logs a lot of events going up to 10 years, but, right out of the box, it's 365 days. It comes at a cost. From the calls that we've been on or the cases that we've worked on, sometimes we've heard it's all E3 or some E5. Select members have it. Sometimes they're in the executive or the strategic echelon of the organization. And some organizations have put some thought about putting E5 on the critical things like finance or accounts payable, to help fortify that. So if they ever get popped, they have something that they can trace onto.
Yeah, and I think one other item of note on this, and we also often come across as an investigation, say if you have an E3 and you say, well, I want to go ahead and I want an E5 now because I want these more logs, it's not retroactive. So you can't say, hey, Microsoft, I want to have these logs retroactively. They're not going to give you that. So make sure, planning ahead, planning for your future, understanding what's important. And some things may not be important to you. Like Tom said, we often see this being split up, where the executive leadership team, people who have things that may come under e-discovery, are more likely to have let's invest the money in there. So it just comes to knowing what your crown jewels are, basics of, the incident response process. All right, Tom, and I think you're going to talk about some of the ways that you can make your users more aware, right? So what are some tips for that?
Yes. So we've already started talking about how some of the technology is out there to assist. And sometimes technology has a weak spot to it. Not knocking it or anything like that, no shade, but I feel that once people understand what they're looking at, then it's not so fearsome and they can be abreast on what to spot for. I'd like to say it's like bad art. You know it when you see it. But with technology, it's almost like you have to have, a special time and expense put into understanding the material, or it changes all the time. Thanks, to Microsoft and advances and what have you we have for these things, but the training that is used for awareness training on social engineering in particular should stay abreast to current methodologies, that attackers are using. So it's not just a phishing link with a URL that says, come get your holiday cookies and stuff like that, or how to get free coffee, because who doesn't like free coffee, sort of stuff. But, it should be anything that seems to suggest of, hey, we want you to change payment, or if there's some kind of false sense of urgency, either that coming through an email, a phone call, or anything else like that, that triggers, wait, I got to put attention onto this right now. And somehow my decision-making to thoroughly scrutinize this is being short-circuited. Also, as Liz talked about, we looked at a number of these things, and we've seen cases where we've seen spoofed domains or typo squatted domains. And this is where I feel it's especially important for users to be trained to look for, not only their enterprise's domain, what normal looks like, so then they can spot the peculiar ones, but the training should also inflect on who they do work with. So if they have to reach out to IRS.gov, the I should not be a 1, or the O should not be a 0 in Gov, and things like that, because they can be very, very crafty, or they can add these extra spoof domains. And you could use that as alerts to see if those kind of messages or anything that are coming into the organization that seems to show a variation of a spoof domain than what's normally expected. Also, we've seen the ones where they're poorly crafted, or they got bad language or grammar, excuse me, that's mentioned in there. Just seems inappropriate or abrupt or different than what was normally expected, especially if there's an ongoing relationship, between like accounts payable and a vendor. And all of a sudden the vendor comes back and starts using something else and say, hey, you need to change payment now, that sort of thing. Things that are kind of weird. I would also add to you that a lot of organizations and systems do offer, through like Proofpoint and other technologies, of a message warning with a banner that says, hey, this came outside of your organization. And, users should not be, worried about that, sick that every external email is a threat that's out to get them, but give them a moment of pause to look at that, saying, hey, this comes outside of your domain, that comes out, so you need to consider it just a little bit more, seeing if there's any red flags, or if it's got that, concern about it, if there's anything fishy about it, pun fully intended.
And one other note too, I think as you are working through your security awareness training and just the culture that you're creating within your organization, making it okay and desirable to report these things is very important. Please, stop shaming your users, even if it's behind their back. Don't call them stupid. They are victims just like somebody who got mugged, right? So treat them with sensitivity, or they'll stop reporting to you. And then what are you going to do, right? So let's move on into our next phase of the response process, and that's detection and initial containment. So next slide, please. So what are some of the ways that you could be detecting these compromises, right? And so we all know within IR, we want to detect as fast as possible. So alerting, there are many things within Defender and with other technologies, or a lot of email technologies that can alert you on things like when somebody starts doing email forwarding rules, unusual login activity, people who are sending emails at 3 o'clock in the morning and they typically send them at 8 a.m., domain spoofing, things that come from new domains. Your technology is there to assist you, work with it. But remember, somebody has to look at these alerts as well. So remember that you have to tune and care for your machines, and someone has to respond to this stuff. So alerting and acting on that is probably your best way of detecting these. The second one is also what we just talked about, and that's user reporting. You want to be friends with them. You want your users to come to you and tell you, this looks weird, this looks sus, what is going on? The last one is the way you don't want to be alerted to a BEC, but unfortunately it happens all the times. And that could be from a third party. So it could be, well, maybe it's your bank telling you they stopped the weird $50,000 transaction. That would be great to hear, but still it's coming from the third party. You want to be ahead of this, but it could also come from your customer if they were on the receiving end of it, or it could come from a 3-letter agency or other, things like that. So it is important to have within your response process how you respond to this. How do you investigate if your company gets notified by a third party that there is a potential business email compromise? So while we don't want that to happen, it's important to be planning for that, because it does happen. All right, next slide, please. One of the most important things to do if you do detect through your detection shows that you've got a wire transfer fraud, right? So there's some immediate things to do here, and they're highlighted. So one, call your bank, because they may be able to reverse the charge. They may be able to recall it. There are a lot of things that they may be able to do. So they should be one of your first calls. Your second, or maybe your first call should be to your lawyer. Legal needs to be involved in this, and especially your cyber insurance. So, preaching to the choir, I know, but know your cyber insurance policy. What will they cover? When are they required to get notified? And also the IC3, which is basically a branch of the FBI, is there for your recovery assets. So if particularly like if you reach out to them and you had a business email compromise and you didn't have any monetary problems, they may not be able to assist you, but you can still consult with your lawyers whether or not you should report to them. And again, consult with your lawyers first before you do any of this. So I go talk to my lawyer and they said, oh yes, money, we had $50,000 that went through a wireless fraud, right? That can be reported to the IC3 and they can assist in some fund recovery. So that would be a time that would be appropriate. But again, I was like, talk to your lawyers. All right, I think we're ready to move into the next phase, which I think is going to make Tom super happy. And we're going to talk about analysis. So I'm an incident commander here at Trusted Sec. So a lot of times I'm just watching the analysis that my super smart analysts are doing. So Tom, why don't you walk us through some of the investigation goals and what you're looking for while you do analysis of these compromises?
Well, thanks for that. And you really propped me up there. So I definitely appreciate it, Liz. But she speaks the truth on this. There's a lot of the things that we have to go through, and this is what we spend our day on. And I got to say, sometimes it's a lot of work, but it's also could be exciting. Starting with any kind of investigation goals, whether Liz is asking the question or it comes out through the throes of analysis, we're always asking them about, what are their goals? What are they hoping to get out from this? And, I like to say it's answering the interrogatives, who, what, when, where, how, maybe some why in there and things like that. So I got a couple of them here, like what did the attackers do? Did they impersonate a user? Did they create other accounts? Did they access, the emails of any other accounts payable team members? Did they send emails out, with a phishing attachment, that sort of thing? How was this done? Did they use any kind of MFA bypass? If there was an MFA in the first place, did they take credentials that were scraped or offered out on the dark web and use those? Were they logging in through VPNs, or was it straight through like a web UI, for something that's facing the internet? How did other things happen, such as were they taking emails and secreting them away into like a inbox folder that's none of us really ever go into, like RSS subscriptions or junk folder? I've never looked at my own up until I got into this job. Then I started looking all the time. Well, for the rank and file employee, that may be a dark place that not a lot of people go into. Attackers like putting, emails into there so they can kind of secret them away and use that for their own good. And then the who. Always go back to looking out to see if there was anybody besides that poor user that put their hand up and said, I think something bad happened, or, it came from third-party notification and they, identified one user in the organization. They said, yeah, it did happen me. I thought it was going to be okay. So it's important to set the user at ease, because you want to find out information from them, and you may find out that patient zero individual, it may spider out beyond them, so you need to find out who else, and these are typical interrogative questions that we get into. When we talk about, talking to the users, because they're a fantastic source of information, one thing that I would like to preface as we get started, double check and check with your HR, check with your legal, and explain the situation. You have to talk to this user because they are the focus of a BEC phishing campaign that may have happened. Be sure that you can articulate that purpose, and HR and legal will help you out and make sure that you don't step on anything or cause them any issues. Also, fantastic, you want to make sure that the victimized user is sat at ease. They may be embarrassed. They may be indignant. They may feel that this is a waste of time, or they're too busy and other things like that. Set them at ease, put them on the team of finding out information, for it. But you do have to have a discussion, maybe one or two or more as the case goes on, because as we analyze data, we find things out that we haven't been told about. We'll ask, hey, does the user log into like a MiFi device, from like another country? Do they have any kind of like a record of what that MiFi carrier is? Is it a teleco, or do they go in through a VPN? And what is that? How long have they been using a iPhone, fixed 15 Pro Max as their MFA device. It's the only MFA device that they have. How long have they been doing that? What is their host that they like to use, that they normally use at home or at the office? Is it a Microsoft Surface tablet, or are they doing it on MacBook Pro or other things like that? These are things that help us in terms of creating a picture of understanding that initial chalk outline around the user that we can go on. So when we start looking at the logs and looking at the digital evidence, we'll see what matches up. And anything that's outside that gray area, questions do help. But handle the user appropriately, to see if they can get additional information out. Sometimes they may not recall, and you have to be okay with that, and maybe it comes out later. When we start getting into looking at data, there is a massive amount of data that we will go through. And a lot of it is going to be those authentication logs. There will be the interactive sign-ins from Azure. There'll be the unified access logs that we'll get from Purview and other things like that. And here's a snippet that I put in front of you. We've taken, the victimized username and masked them with user one. The column is sorted on that, and it's tuned to that. And what you have in front of it is different sets of IP addresses in a short period of time. So just take our word for it. This is all in a very, very short period of time. We see multiple client apps and browsers. That's a little weird. We see different operating systems. So some of these things are really, really suspicious to go after. If this doesn't match up what the user said that they had, that could be a red flag. Furthermore, is there going to be things that are going to be inappropriate for it? So if the user never travels or leaves out a certain geographical region, and all of a sudden they're logging in from Dubai, that's a clue. Go after that. Then look at the IP addresses and the user agents that are associated with the strange, localities. But do be sure to, run those things down. But, you may also see VPN. So validate that the VPN that is purported or asserted to be used by the user in their log session is the one that's for the enterprise. Are they using a private VPN? A lot of us tend to have a, whether you're going to use something like Nord Security or PIA, those kind of things. It's important to have that interview and those kind of questions come out. So when you look at the log analysis, you could see what is bad, what has been stated by or asserted by the user of what they use normally, and then everything else remains sus. So we got to get into some of those permissions about what it takes to actually extracting some of these logs. So for instance, the unified access log. So this is through like Purview. Microsoft's changed the names of it. It used to be Exchange Online. So this is one thing that comes into it. We're looking at not just having a guest account for accessing those logs, but you have to create a new account group that will allow for viewing users, viewing records, and getting all items. This is not something that a typical administrative account is going to be able to handle. It's got to be something that's set up. It's nice when it's set up in advance. A lot of times it's set on the fly. And we have a list of these are the account permissions that have to be established for it. Then furthermore, the Security Compliance Center offers these logs in chunks. If you do it through the UI, you get chunks of them in about 50K records, to extract each time. That's if you use the UI. The thing that I would also point out to you is there are a number of tools and APIs that can get around this. Some of those tools may be locked into like the 90-day time span that we had talked about just a little bit ago. Some of those tools will be rewritten to encompass 180 days since the Microsoft announcement in October. But those tools are allowed you to go and splice and get all the records going back as far as you need to understand what happened to that impacted user. But it's very important to be completely thorough in this process of extracting all the logs. And 50,000 sounds like a lot. it's not quite, especially if you have to go back months, and especially if it was like third-party notification that happens, like 2 months ago. You may have to go back and see what else was going on pre-incident to that. Maybe it happened 4 months ago and they stayed in the environment for a period of long time. So 50,000 for a very busy enterprise is not going to go very far for you. So let's talk about some of those access logs that we'd like to get into. So for these logs, what I feel is important to talk about is the GeoIP locations. We had an exhibit out there where we had IP addresses from Dubai or what have you. And if it looks like it's from an unusual place, see what the disposition of those logins are. The interactive sign-ons is usually very, very helpful in showing every time that somebody is logged in and what was the disposition of their login session. Whether they failed, and then successfully tried, maybe that's a clue. Once they have successfully logged in, you use that as a pivot point. That's a red flag for you to go after. And it's very, very important to understand that, because that's where, either the attacker's gone in or the user's gone in. So you want to establish which of it was. And if they don't have any, travel plans or records that they've done, recently, then it has to be assumed that somebody popped their account and was doing this as soon as they were able to hijack the session token and take their creds and attempt to log in. Liz was talking about logins at suspicious times, things that are outside. If they're on vacation or on weekends and what have you and stuff like that, but they're logging in, maybe they had something and they forgot or whatever, but look at everything with a lot of scrutiny for it. And I also showed that exhibit of unusual user agents. All these things that are here as bullets on the slide should be IOCs that you go after: IP addresses, user agents, localities, maybe even sometimes, because after you finish looking at the logs from one user, there's a chance that you may have to look at all the logs from everybody else if this thing is spidered out. In our next slide, I want to get into what I think is one of my favorite ones that, up until lately, when the log retention has, expanded to 180 days, is any of the forwarding rules or rules for in the inboxes that are created by the attackers. This is... in the past, this was used to take interesting, juicy emails that the threat actor thought was highly useful for their own means and secretly forward them off, to their own recipients. Now they can, if they can log in anytime that they want to, they could just store them inside a folder like RSS subscriptions or junk or deleted items. You want to look for not only just the user's forwarding rules, but any forwarding rules or inbox rules for the entire tenant itself. So all the users. And again, during your interview, yes, do you have any forwarding rules? Do you use things to, like, you have a vacation rule, an out of office rule, or you've been getting spam from going to that conference? Do you have any rules for, moving those to a deleted folder? Tell us what normal looks like so we can understand what are the peculiar or the suspicious items. Again, hiding the emails, in folders, would be really interesting, especially if the rule logic has any kind of juicy terms, that things that could compromise, payments, how they get ACH treatments, who does invoices, who pays for stuff, and then they spidered out. And then if those things could be taken or stolen out of the environment through exfiltration. All these things, and especially with the forwarding rules, the rules in general, these can be all IOCs. And before I move off this slide, super duper important to understand that rule creation sets a timestamp in the logs that we can use as investigators to see when the rule was created. If it was something that was done by the adversary or threat actor, I like to say, then, that's something that marks a great time. And hopefully you have logs that go back to this time. In the past, that that this kind of event creation of a rule in the inbox has preceded the historical span of the logs. That could be interesting. You have to look somewhere else, but it's very nice to look for the forwarding rules because that they have those timestamps. If you find suspicious rules, please please document those, before they are disabled, because that will be useful for an investigation going forward. And we want to be talking about business email compromises if we weren't talking about emails, and especially the ones that are sent by attackers. And regardless of whether it's, Microsoft Business Standard E3 or E5, emails that are sent by attackers are especially useful. So if we're looking at like message trace or the unified access logs, we're looking for things that are either sent to, blind copy, forwarded to, those kind of things, or even items that you provide in a PSD. Recent memory, we were provided PSD files, and we found not only the phishes, but we found all the run-up conversations where the threat actor had gotten to the organization, introduced themselves into the flow of changing, payment information, and then providing fraudulent documentation to get their email, get their payment sent to the fictitious routing institution, payment institution rather. Okay, and just because the emails say that they're deleted, Microsoft keeps them in a recoverable state for 14 days. What you're trying to get out of that is, who did the attackers send emails to? It could be internal employees to the organization. It could be family members, but likelihood, since it's business, they're going to go after the external parties. So that could be banks, institutions, vendors, customers, to try to get them. So all those things are really, really sweet IOCs. We spent a little time talking about IP addresses, doing those geo IP lookups, whether you get them from the interactive sign-ins, whether there is a fishy IP address in the connected with a suspicious rule creation, or you find a sent email that is associated. You're going to take those IP addresses and run them to ground. Microsoft has some pretty good geo IP lookups. The access logs contain this geographic information that you could use, provide some context to this. I can't say enough about message trace, especially if you see anything that these are the messages that were sent by the attackers, to these places. They will have that metadata, including the IP addresses. Please double check, those IP addresses, whether it's through Microsoft's geo IPs. You can use MaxMind, Tor, Talos, any number, of web reputation. See if it makes sense. But what you're really looking for is to see if anything doesn't match what is the normal for you. So if your attackers in that particular case are using like an ExpressVPN or a onion router like Tor, exit node, those things will show up, and you get that understanding once you've done those lookups on it. Sometimes it could be kind of like, instead of a flashing red indication, like this is coming from, a private VPN technology or solution, they could be coming from a Soho, or something that doesn't have necessarily a bad reputation, but it's more on the yellow, and you're nah, kind of thing. Check to see elsewhere if there's any reputation that goes along with it. And I think recently we've worked on a case where we had a lot of MiFi that was using a telecom, and it just happened to have a bad reputation, and we had to kind of run that to ground. But do keep in mind that the attackers don't always attack just from foreign locales. They'll come from US IP addresses as well. So timing and context really matters, especially if it's timing and context that involves different operating systems, different user agents, or when the victimized user was out on vacation or away for the weekend and everybody else besides the attacker knew about that. You want to identify where the attackers are coming from. And once you identified where they're coming from, this just goes into your big pile of IOCs. You want to look for, all these things. And not only if you have an exhibit of the phishing email that they've provided you, this will be helpful in your investigation. That means, if you have the headers for that initial phishing email that came through, you can look to see the route that it went through, or if it was from within the organization, and then that spiders out from patient 0 to patient 0 prime, or whatever the naming convention you want to use. You can identify these phishing messages through message trace, and the user access logs. If you export PSTs, we as examiners have gone through PSTs, extracted sent items or received items, found the original phish emails. A couple notable cases we see, the case where maybe it's a PDF file that was provided with that. And then that PDF file means that you have to provide some document exploitation or analysis on that PDF file to see when it was created. Maybe there are some metadata watermark that's on it that's useful for your IOCs. If it involves a host system where somebody has received a document that has macros in it, like an Excel document or a PDF that runs JavaScript or whatever, you may have to do some host analysis with it and, pull all the browser history from that host. If it's going to be the type of gambit where the attackers provided you a phishing email that had a QR code or quishing with it, quishing, you scan that QR code to accept that connection or find out what HR is sending you. It's important to understand that the machine that receives that email and displays that QR code is not necessarily the one that scans it and provides it. It may now be on a mobile phone that you may have to consider how you run that down and analyze that too. But when you're looking at the host analysis, or you're looking at browser history, whether it's going to be from your workstation or your mobile device, look at the browser history, look to see if there's any documents such as Office Trust records, suspicious documents. Pull the MFT off of a host, or see if you could do timeline analysis and see what was that root cause. Because there's a likelihood that you're going to find something in there that connects that phishing element and the documents that were purported with it to the BEC campaign. And I think this is the spot where Liz picks up.
It is, and this is what we're gonna, what we're gonna leave you with, right? I know we're running up on time, but this part of an investigation is of the incident response process is clearly just as important as all the rest of them. Just because we have incident responders often turn to other people to perform these steps doesn't mean we don't value them as much. All right, so next slide. So containment. The biggest piece here really is please document everything. And if you're an analyst or responder, whoever who is working on this incident, the documentation I know is painful, but we need it, right? And we need it for a number of things. It could be you need it for your notes later to go back. It could be you're going to bring in a third-party forensic provider and they need to know what you do, or you may need it for litigation, right? So please make sure that you're documenting everything. If you do things like I saw a forwarding rule and I'm going to delete it, and we all get excited and we do things, please take a screenshot of that before you delete it, just so you know what it was there. Other things that you can do to contain these type of incidents, resetting compromised user passwords, that is obviously a clear thing, or you can also just disable the user. You can create new profiles for people if needed. And this is just going to be dependent on your business needs, right? Disabling forwarding rules, obviously, is something you can do. The next two, I think, are very important. That's signing out your user from their active sessions and revoking all their active tokens. Because remember, if you reset a password and somebody still has that active session, they still have access, right? So make sure that you follow through all of those steps. Next slide. And so hopefully you have done this in the preparation phase. But again, if you have not at this time, make sure that you go ahead and set all your security defaults. So it's available for all licenses, not just the E5s. And what that'll do is it'll automatically turn on MFA. Hopefully you turned on MFA a long time ago, but you can turn it on now. It's still not too late. So you can turn it on just by enabling the security defaults. This also will disable any legacy protocols. Again, turn to Microsoft for all the fun details of what that means. Next slide. And there are also some additional protections that are available within M365. These are things obviously you could do in the preparation phase. But one thing that we love here at Trusted Sec, and I think everybody who deals with business email compromises loves, is conditional access policies. These are the ways that you can make security work for your users. It's very hard to balance my business needs with security needs. I know often security is seen as a stop sign. So conditional access is one of those ways you can tailor things to your organization and also make things that are just, kind of helping you figure out some obvious things like impossible travel alerts. So say I'm user Adam1 and I normally log in from San Antonio, Texas, and all of a sudden Adam1 is logging in from Perth. That's in Australia, then you would get an alert, and there's a number of things that you could do for that. So one of the things also within the risk policies that you can enable within Microsoft, those can be by sign in or user, and you can basically structure those to do whatever your risk acceptance is, right? And it could be if somebody signs in, say you have, somebody triggers an not impossible travel, but somebody triggers like a geo IP location thing, right? You can have different things set up. And so it could just say, hey, I'm going to require them to enter MFA, or it could block all access. So you're able to go in, look at these things, tailor them to your organization, and they'll certainly be something that's going to help you in the long run. Something else that's currently in preview right now for M365 is token protection. It's also known as token binding. And basically what that'll do is it'll say that whatever token that you're creating for your MFA session has to align with a certain system, right? So if that token then comes in and is normally associated, say I've got it with my Mac, and all of a sudden an Android phone is trying to use that token, then it won't work, right? This is something, though, it's still in preview. I think it's available in beta. Again, go to Microsoft to find that out. And so we can wrap this up. Let's go to the next slide and talk about another ways a Trusted Sec can help you. If all of this seems very, very complicated and you don't want to deal with this yourself, we are here to help you. We actually now have a low-cost investigation for business email compromises, and that's good for one M365 tenant and up to 3 user IDs. We'll help you figure out where the attacker signed in from, what files they accessed and downloaded, emails that were sent depending on your licensing. Go back and see those previous slides. We'll help you know what unauthorized MFA devices were set up or what mailbox rules were configured. And then we can also take that information, then search across your tenant to see if there is a broader compromise. So that is something that is available. And we've got a few minutes for questions. I see one coming here. So any recommendation on tools to document and manage that documentation? Well, if I could solve incident case management, I would have a different job. However, Tom, I think you've got some things. There's a lot of things. Honest, just if worst comes to worst, fall back on an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, that is, it's been a standard for a reason. But definitely, Tom, do you have any tools that you like to use to manage your analysis during an incident?
So a lot of the things that I found have been really, really useful as being an investigator and an analyst is I like using command line things because it's kind of repeatable. I could walk someone through the process. I could take careful notes on it, but there are going to be some things that because of the burden of all the logs and all the information that's there, I simply have to use spreadsheets, or I have to push that through pivot tables where I could search for. So, doing BEC cases has really meant a lot of work with spreadsheets, but I could still take careful notes and I can document. The thing is I need to have an understanding of what that data tells me. And it begins with using logs. The gathering of the logs and other things like that, there's some great APIs and tools like Hawk. Some of these things need to be updated to keep current with what's capable of being gathered, nowadays. But those are a couple of things that I'd really like to go on. To the extent possible, I'd like to try to, scriptify it or make a batch file to make that analysis, and having those flashing red things show up right up at the top.
Awesome. All right. So I think we are at time, and thank you everybody for joining. We encourage you to follow us at Trusted Sec on all of your social media. And if you want to have some more information about this, Trusted Sec will be publishing a blog tomorrow. And of course, if you wanted to share this fantastic webinar with your friends, this will be available on our YouTube later today. Thank you everybody for joining, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone. Excited and happy to be here.